What's up guys, it's Eric from Rare Candy and welcome back to another deck profile here on the channel, and today we are kicking off our Ultra Prism deck profiles, and this is actually going to be Leafeon GX, Decidueye GX. This is the same list that we featured in our recent testing rounds video, so if you want to actually see how this deck looks in action as well, I will have a link in the description for you guys to check that out. And yeah, also, if you are new to the channel and you're not familiar with those testing rounds videos that we post, the lists in the videos are usually kind of our unrefined, rough starting points to begin testing from. So there might be some things in this list we can improve on. It's just kind of our, our rough draft just to get started with this deck. So just something to keep in mind as we're going through this. So yeah, Leafeon GX, one of, I think, the most hyped cards from the set. We were very enthusiastic about it in our set review, another video to go check out if you have not done so yet. And, it has a bunch of partners I've seen people talking about, but Decidueye seems to be the one most people seem to be gravitating towards, including ourselves. So let's take a look at it and see why people are talking about it. So since this is a Leafeon deck, of course, we are playing 4 Eevee for the Energy Evolution ability. Definitely want to use this Eevee because whenever you attach a basic energy, you get to search your deck for a Pokemon that evolves from Eevee that's the same type and immediately evolve. So that means on turn 1, if you attach a grass energy, you can immediately evolve into Leafeon GX and get out your stage 1, and start setting up a little bit. So that's the reason we are playing this. And since Leafeon is kind of the star of the show, we are playing 3 copies of Leafeon GX. So the first reason we are so excited for Leafeon GX is because it has this GX move, Grand Bloom GX, for a single grass energy. You search your deck for a Pokemon that evolves from each of your basic Pokemon on your bench, and you evolve them. So this is crazy because if you go second and you get out Leafeon on the first turn, and let's say you bridge it, get yourself a couple Rowlets, you can immediately have a Leafeon and then 3 Rowlets immediately evolved into Dartrix on the first turn of the game. And that's not counting any other basics you might start with in your hand either. So that is kind of what makes Leafeon, I think, so good. If it did not have this GX move, it'd be kind of a mediocre card, to be fair. It has a decent little other attack, a grass energy, and 2 colorless. This 110, nothing too special. It's a solid little 2-shotting attack, but, it's really not anything crazy. So yeah, luckily after we do use that GX move, Leafeon does have a half-decent attack we can use, but then its ability is also pretty good as well. I think it's actually one of the more underrated parts about the card. So as long as Leafeon is your active Pokemon, you get to heal 50 damage from one of your Pokemon that has any energy on them. So that means, if your opponent, you're playing at some sort of deck that 2-shots your Leafeon, let's just say a Golisopod deck, they typically do 120 damage to you. Well, if you heal 50 after they swing on you, guess what? You're only going to have 70 on you, and they're going to need a Choice Band or to finish knocking you out. So situations like that can force your opponent to have more resources than they might actually have in order to knock you out. So sometimes this ability can actually force your opponent to 3-shot you instead of 2-shot you in some situations. So definitely, I think, an underrated ability about the card. But like I said, the star of the show is Grand Bloom. And actually, one thing you can do, I'm playing 3 copies of Leafeon. You can even cut one of these, I think, and just go down to a 4-2 line, which might seem a little bit weird, but one reason I think you can do that is because after the first turn of the game, that's really the main part of the game where you need Leafeon, I think. I was just a little afraid of maybe opening one in my hand and prizing the other. So that's why I am playing the 3rd copy just to make sure. But if there is something else you definitely want to include in this list, I think actually cutting one Leafeon could be a consideration. Like I said, it seems like a weird cut, but you definitely want to keep maxing out your Eevees to increase your chances of starting with it. But I think, like I said, if you want to cut one of these, I think there is a little bit of flexibility there. So that's going to be Leafeon. That's like the main component of the deck. But of course, like I said, this is a Decidueye variant, so that means we're playing some Decidueyes as well. So, of course, 4 copies of Rowlet, 4 copies of Dartrix, and then, of course, also 4 copies of Decidueye GX as well. So we're not playing Rare Candy in this deck at all. We are exclusively evolving through traditional means and through Leafeon. So like I said, ideally we can get down a couple Rowlets on turn 1, maybe with a Bridget, and then use that Grand Bloom GX to immediately evolve into Dartrix. And of course from there we can just immediately evolve into Decidueye. So I've actually had games when I've been testing this where I've literally had 3 Decidueyes out on turn 2 of the game sometimes. So the consistency boost that Leafeon gives Decidueye as a way to set up is just crazy. The first time I ever used Grand Bloom, I felt like I was cheating. It was so good. So that's been kind of the downside of Decidueye in the past. It's been a fantastic card, has that great Feather Arrow ability, lets you place 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So that's, you know, kind of one of the main reasons this card has been so good in the past, but I think its biggest downside is that it's kind of clunky to get in play. But I think Leafeon actually really streamlines that and helps Decidueye come into play a little bit quicker. The one downside to this deck, though, is that we actually don't have access to Hollow Hunt GX. So Decidueye does have a GX move. You get to put 3 cards from your discard pile into your hand for a single grass energy. But, like I mentioned, Grand Bloom GX is going to be our GX move of choice, but there might still be some situations where Hollow Hunt can come in handy. Then Decidueye has a similar kind of, just a generic attack for a grass and double colorless energy like Leafeon, but Razor Leaf does 90, so not quite as good as Leafeon's 110 for the same energy cost. But like I said, the main reason we are using this is for Feather Arrow. So between Feather Arrows and Leafeon's attack for 110 with a choice band, that's 140. So between your Feather Arrows and Leafeon, you can actually sometimes get one-hit knockouts as well. So that's going to be Decidueye. It's going to be the other, I guess, core component of the deck. From there, we're still playing some other Pokemon. We're playing a 1-1 Zoroark GX line. And typically, 1-1 lines I'm not a big fan of in a lot of decks because, you know, they're hard to search out and they're hard to get into play. But luckily with Leafeon, I think that actually makes running 1-1 lines and things like that much more consistent, because all you need to do is bridge it out, the one basic that you need, and then you can use Grand Bloom GX to evolve that Pokemon. So that's one reason why I feel actually pretty comfortable with just the 1-1 line of Zoroark GX. And one thing that's important to note is Grand Bloom actually will let you evolve Pokemon that aren't grass as well. So that means if I get out a Zorua on the first turn with a Bridget, we can immediately evolve it into Zoroark GX. So the reason we're running Zoroark GX is actually for a few things. So the first one is Riotous Beating. It makes Zoroark a decent little backup attacker just for a double colorless energy, 20 for every Pokemon you have in play. So just a nice little 2-shotting attack, cheaper than Leafeon's attack, but also it has trade. So one thing that you'll see in this list is that there are a lot of extra counts of cards that we are running to help ensure we can get the turn 1 Grand Bloom. That's really what this deck is about. So really we only, I think, need 2 Leafeons in this deck, but we're still playing 4 copies of Eevee to ensure that we start with it. As you'll see, we're playing an inflated count of Bridget as well. So there are definitely things that are going to be clumping up our deck in the late game. So trade really helps at just helping you draw extra cards, but also helps thin out these useless cards in the late game that you no longer need. So trade, a great ability, discard a card from your hand, draw 2 cards. So, you know, just another great part of the deck. You know, we've seen Decidueye variants before Ultra Prism run Zoroark in their decks as well, so I don't see a reason to cut it now at this point either. So next up, we're playing 1 copy of Espeon EX. I think that's been kind of a staple of Decidueye variants for that Miraculous Shine attack. For a colorless energy, you get to de-evolve all of your opponent's Pokemon from the highest stage. So Decidueye is kind of cool because you get to spread all this damage around with Feather Arrow, and then maybe in the late game you can use Miraculous Shine to de-evolve some stuff that only has 60 HP, and your Feather Arrows can basically pick them off from de-evolving them. So Espeon, definitely a good card in Decidueye variants. And the last cards in the list, 2 copies of Tapu Lele GX, of course, for Wonder Tag, and also since we do play double colorless energy, we can use Energy Drive if we choose to as well. So that's the Pokemon line. Going on to the supporters, though, we have some interesting things. So we have 3 Professor Sycamore, discard your hand, draw 7. Pretty straightforward. We're also playing 3 copies of Cynthia, which is a new supporter from Ultra Prism. Shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 6 cards. So this is the return of Professor Oak's new theory, and this has been a card I think Evolution decks have been wanting for a while. Just because a lot of times you don't want the Sycamore. You don't want to have to discard your hand that has all these evolution pieces. So Cynthia offers an alternative to that without having to refresh your opponent's hand as well. That's why we're playing Cynthia. Definitely a card I've been enjoying, just in general, with all the Ultra Prism decks I've been trying out. And then from there we have 2 copies of N, of course. Shuffle your opponent, or both you and your opponent, shuffle their hands into their deck and draw equal to the amount of prizes they have left. So I will do a little disclaimer. This is, all of my supporter lines for Ultra Prism are kind of a work in progress. I'm still tweaking things. Just trying to get the right ratio between Sycamore, Cynthia, and N is going to be a little tricky in certain situations, because right now in the Crimson Invasion format, basically every deck plays the same supporter line for Sycamore, for N. But now with Cynthia, I think that is going to make players have to rethink their supporter lines a little bit. And one thing I'm thinking about actually is changing potentially a Sycamore over to an N. Reason I'm actually even playing Sycamore at all in this deck is because, like I said, there are a lot of excess cards that you don't really need in the late game. So I wanted to have an out to, getting rid of them and digging deep. I think another consideration for this deck is actually Hala. I think that could be a great shuffle draw option. So it's that supporter, if you've played your GX move for the game, you get to shuffle in and draw 7. So maybe that could even be superior to Cynthia in this deck. Like I said, this is what I'm trying out for the moment, but it is definitely a work in progress and is potential to change. But then, of course, we have 2 copies of Guzma just to choose what we want to take knockouts on. Most decks typically play 3, but since we are kind of a spread deck, we can, I think, get by just with the 2 copies if we choose to. So then next up we have 3 copies of Bridget. Like I said, kind of an inflated count, but that's because we want to ensure that we can use Bridget on the first turn of the game. The big thing with this deck is every game you want to Bridget and you want to use Grand Bloom GX on the first turn. So the whole deck needs to kind of be built around that. If you're not doing that consistently, the deck needs some work. So that's why we were playing the inflated count Bridget. You could even debatably go up to a 4th count. I know that seems really wild, but that is something I was actually considering. So a 4th Bridget, or I think a 1 Nest Ball actually would be some other considerations. But the 3 has been working pretty good so far. So that's why we are playing that. And like I said, in the late game, you can actually just Sycamore away your extra copies or use trade to discard them to draw more useful cards. So that's going to be it for the supporter count. Nothing too crazy, no real text or anything like that. So going on to the items we have, of course, for Ultra Ball to search out whatever Pokemon we like. And since we can discard cards from our hand, we can get rid of those extra copies of Bridget and Eevee if we have to. 2 copies of Choice Band just to increase our damage output a little bit more. So between your Choice Bands and Decidueyes, that can actually kind of push Leafeon up to a kind of scary amount of damage. You can sometimes be able to knock out basic GXs and EXs in one hit between your Choice Bands and Decidueyes. Then we're also playing 3 copies of Floatstone. So of course that's to give us free retreat. And we're playing 3 because we want to be able to retreat for free. If we don't start with Eevee, we max out our count of Eevees, but there's going to be some games where we don't actually get to start with it. So if we play a heavy count of Floatstone, that'll help ensure that we can get one down to be able to use Grand Bloom GX on the first turn if possible. So like I said, that's why we're playing some of these inflated counts. Floatstone, a card I would even consider going up to 4 of. It's another one of those cards that just helps you get off the turn 1 Grand Bloom GX, which is kind of the most important part of this deck, I think. 2 copies of Field Blower to discard our opponent's tool cards and stadiums. So pretty self-explanatory, definitely has been a staple in the game for a while now. And then 1 Rescue Stretcher just to get back resources from our deck. Or I'm sorry, from our discard pile. So we get to put a Pokemon from our discard into our hand or shuffle 3 back into our deck. So just a nice little form of recovery if we do have to discard some stuff early on or if stuff gets knocked out. So that's going to be it for the trainer cards. And going on to our energy, we of course have 4 double colorless energy since basically all of our attackers in the entire deck can use it. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 grass energy just to round out the list. So it's a decent solid amount of grass energy just to help ensure that we can open with it on the first turn or so of the game to get our Leafeons into play as quick as possible. So yeah guys, this is going to be our first draft of a Leafeon GX Decidueye deck. And like I mentioned too, there are some things kind of in progress even as I'm recording this video. I do want to play around with the supporter counts a little bit. Like I said, I think that's going to be something players are going to have to get used to as far as, now that Cynthia's in the mix, we're going to have to rethink, what ratio of Sycamore and Cynthia do we want in decks now. Another thing to think about is Glaceon GX. We have yet to see how Glaceon is going to impact the metagame, and that might force us to run more physical counts of supporters. So we'll have to see how that is going to influence deck building as well. But like I said, just as a starting point, I think this will be pretty nice. This has definitely been a very, very fun deck I've been trying out. Seems to be pretty consistent. I get the turn 1 Grand Bloom, I'd say most games, at least turn 2 at the latest. So definitely seems like Leafeon could have some potential and definitely a fun deck to try out. But yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed a look at this early deck profile. If you're new here to the channel, definitely stay tuned. We're going to have a ton of Ultra Prism coverage coming over the next couple weeks. But as usual, feel free to like and subscribe. And if you can support us over at rarecandytcg.com and pick up something maybe like this awesome Decidueye playmat that was in the video, or by supporting us over on patreon.com/rarecandytcg, that would also be great as well. But with that, I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you for the next one.